Hello and oh, better try it again. Okay. Hello and welcome to Accredited Real Estate School's first quarter 2022 real estate update. I'm Bryan Church, and we have some information on what we think is going to happen the first quarter of 2022. And as always, remember this is not for investment advice. It's just for informational purposes only. So let's get going. So interest rates are expected to stay low for a long period of time because if interest rates do increase, the U.S. Treasury will not be able to service the constantly increasing national debt, which, as they said, is at 28 trillion and growing. With you look at all the debts, this means that at some point in time, the U.S. government will not be able to pay the interest payments on the national debt if the interest rates go up. So that's a good indication of why the U.S. government's going to try to keep interest rates down, which is great for real estate, of course. To ensure that the U.S. government can pay the interest payments on the national debt, the U.S. Treasury will try to inflate the U.S. dollar and pay the national debt back with cheaper inflated U.S. dollars. The money that's being paid by the U.S. government to investors who bought U.S. Treasuries will be worth less than it was worth when the money was originally loaned to the U.S. government. This is called inflation. So the government, they want inflation, but they don't want to increase the interest rate. So they've got themselves a little bit in a little bit of a bind because there's not a lot of things they can do right now. And we're going to go over that here shortly. Inflation occurs when there is too much money chasing too few goods, and the U.S. government continues to print money and more money. This can be the start of inflation. That's called monetary inflation. However, money printing by itself does not cause inflation. Money printing, along with an increase in the velocity of money, is when inflation normally follows. And that's something we don't have right now is velocity of money. What the velocity of money means is that the velocity of money occurs when there is a multiplier effect as money changes hands from one person to another. Example, say person A pays $10 to person B for the purchase of an item, just any item. Person B accepts the $10 from person A, keeps $5 of that, and then uses the other $5 to purchase a different item from person C. Person C keeps $250 of that, uses the other $250 to purchase a different item from person D. Therefore, the original $10 that was paid by person A becomes $17.50, because remember, we got $10 plus 5 plus $250 is $17.50. In economic productivity, the increase from $10 value to $17.50 in value is called the velocity of money, and this is needed before inflation can occur. Start devaluing the U.S. dollar. So what this is monetary inflation, and it hasn't really kicked in as yet. But we're seeing right now is more of a fiscal inflation, where the activities of the governments, different governments, federal, state, local government, they've been instituting things like the Green New Deal, those type of things, and they've caused an increase in prices based on the restrictions that they put on that. For example, down in the port down in Los Angeles, the trucks that come in there have a couple of issues. The truckers, one of them is if their truck is registered for 2011, they may not be able to get registration to register in California. And another thing is that the gig economy laws reaching out and getting them, whereas making rather than independent contractors, making them employees from a standpoint, so they're increasing costs. So that's one of the issues we're seeing, is that you're seeing some inflation, but it's not being caused by the velocity of money. So that means that when the velocity of money does increase down the road, we could be in for some pretty serious inflation, but that could be down the road, and that's called hyperinflation. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, people have been scared to spend money and either increase their savings or pay down credit card balances. Neither caused an increase in the velocity of money nor a subsequent increase in inflation, at least monetary inflation. And we've been seeing some other types of inflation, at the end of 2021 and going into 2022. So that means that it could get a lot worse in the medium to long-term future. However, as excessive money printing starts to occur and people start to anticipate that inflation will appear in the future, that's what we're seeing right now. They may decide to buy larger items earlier than planned to get a lower price than if they were purchased at a later date. These purchases increase the velocity of money and maybe the start of a real inflationary cycle that could last for decades. And that's what we're probably seeing is not only this inflation, but with no growth. It's called stagflation. And there's a good chance that's going to be happening down the road. The U.S. economy is presently fighting against strong deflationary forces. And this is, of course, against inflation. It's called deflationary, caused by aging demographics. Baby boomers are retiring. They don't have to buy anything. They don't really don't need anything to purchase. And technological innovations are really reducing costs, making things cheaper to produce and services easier to provide. And that's a big one because things like DocuSign are out there, whereas the real estate professionals, when they get a deal that they're putting together, instead of having to drive over to the buyer and seller and get this, signatures, they can just send it through DocuSign, which is digitally. They sign it, and it saves so much time and effort and cost. Okay, the U.S. government has recently, either knowingly or unknowingly, we're not sure which, because with politicians, you never know really what they know and what they don't know about. They adopted a monetary policy called Modern Monetary Theory, or MMT. The theory believes that the U.S. government can print as much money as it wants until inflation appears. Then it can use taxes to cool down the inflation, similar to turning a faucet on and off. This is one reason the federal government's trying to bolster the IRS so they can collect more taxes to help cool down inflation when it hits. They actually think that the modern monetary theory will work, when in fact it will not work. It's probably the worst idea that's ever been proposed. They're actually using it right now, and people don't even know what it is. Unfortunately, inflation does not work this way. Inflation can suddenly morph into out of control hyperinflation with no way to stop it. And matter of fact, except increase interest rates to like 18% or higher, like the Fed Chairman Paul Volcker did back in 79 and 80. That was what happened when you get to a huge, strong hyperinflation. You may have to increase interest rates. And that should be, we get to that point, it should be set, quite a long-term years down the road before that was happen. We think that interest rates are going to stay down for quite a while. And again, that's good for the real estate values and the real estate profession. Volcker increased interest rates to a high enough level to encourage people to keep their money in the banks, thus reduce the velocity of money in the U.S. economy. So right now we don't have the velocity. We're going to probably get some velocity down the road, and then at that point they'll probably end up having to increase interest rates again, just like they did back in the late 70s, early 80s. And since velocity of money is needed for inflation, this started the U.S. economy back toward normal levels of inflation. So right now they're trying to increase the velocity of money, which is, it's very, very low right now. And then down the road, they'll probably have to go back the other direction. And the Fed's always usually a year and a half out from whatever their policies are when they actually take effect. It's about a year and a half out. Hyperinflation will cause the U.S. dollar to become worth less and less over time. This causes people who have pensions, fixed income annuities, bonds, and slow to increase wages to be hurt the most. And that's unfortunate, because what the government wants to do is get the inflation going, pay the national debt off to cheaper dollars. But the people who are harmed are all the people, the hardworking people who put in these pensions and they're getting Social Security. They may have a problem because they're going to be getting a set amount, and as the inflation kicks in down the road, hyperinflation, then the value of their pensions is going to decrease, and they're going to end up being hurt by that, and that's unfortunate. So people who are smart are starting to make moves right now into asset classes and inflation hedges that track inflation so that they don't have that happen to them. People who will survive the future mass devaluation of the U.S. dollar will be the ones who are the early movers in inflation hedges, such as real estate. Real estate is one of the best inflation hedges there is. Inflation hedge is an asset that's purchased because it will maintain its value through both asset price inflation, that's when increases in real estate values, and consumer price inflation, when you have an increase in consumer goods. And we'll explain that here a little bit. Real estate's been a traditional inflation hedge over the years, mostly because it's a tangible asset. And that's really critical, is having a tangible asset. Real estate income properties, such as multi-unit residential apartment buildings, have been excellent inflation hedges because they usually generate income. They increase in value over time until they track inflation. And what, of course, remember, when inflation is going up, even though the value is going up of that property, the actual, the price is going up, the value is going to really maintain, and that's what you want in inflationary, is just so you can maintain your equity position. You don't lose because of the devaluation of the US dollar that's caused by the inflation. Okay, rents can be increased at intervals to track inflation, usually either 6 months a year or down to even month-to-month type situations. And everyone needs a place to live. So usually apartments are in that area where people are going to be pushed down from the purchases and owning properties down to the point where they may be renting apartments. And that's why apartments look real good for the future. And because an apartment owner can always rent an apartment to someone for some rental amount, even though it may not be as much rent as the owner would like to collect from a tenant who occupies the property. So that's a good thing for us and for real estate. Old apartment buildings located in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods became a problem in 2020 and 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the eviction moratoriums that were issued by the Center for Disease Control by the state of California, local counties, city rental agencies. Many tenants stopped paying rent, and landlords were not able to pay the debt service on the real estate loans encumbering the property. So what happened was that we got into the pandemic. The Center for Disease Control started off saying it was an eviction moratorium, which I don't even think they even constitutionally can do that, but they did it for about, what was it? More than 12, about 18 months there. They had a problem where tenants could stop paying rent, and then what was supposed to happen is that the landlords could go to the federal government and get some restitution. Of course, that always takes a while to get any money from the government. So that was a difficult situation for the landlords of permanent rentals, residential rentals. And hopefully that doesn't ever happen again, because that made it really difficult for apartment buildings. A lot of people had purchased apartment buildings because of the great inflation hedges. They'd sold stocks and securities in the stock market, paid their capital gains tax, moved the money over to physical assets, which was real estate. A lot of them bought apartment buildings. And the ones who did that earlier on ended up getting hammered by this, unfortunately. And so that was a big, big issue in 2020 through 2021. And then Class A apartment complexes located in higher socioeconomic neighborhoods tend to be solid long-term investments because tenants generally have greater durability of income than tenants of older apartment buildings located in lower socioeconomic areas. What that means is that the really good apartment complexes, high-end ones, tenants usually have a little bit better durability of income, meaning that they have better jobs, and ones that will stay together a little bit better than some of the lower-end properties. Real estate has traditionally been an excellent inflation hedge because it has the advantages of earning income and increasing in value during the property owner's holding period. Real estate prices tend to track inflation. So as real estate values go up on that, and if you have it's a residential rental property, then what will happen is that you can get those rents, and you can actually raise the rents, and it becomes an inflation hedge not only for the purchase, but also for all of the rents that come in. In addition, real estate is an excellent deflation hedge as well, because rental income that's earned during the property owner's holding period is worth more in the future than it is today. So what's good about real estate, it's both an inflation and deflation hedge, even though we don't see deflation being in the cards here in the future, because what we're seeing now is inflation and sometimes a little bit of disinflation, where the inflation may reduce the rate but still be inflation for a while. And so that's going to be the real estate is going to be, of course, good for inflation and deflation. Now let's look at applying this a little bit. When comparing the financial media's inflation narrative to the actual hard data in the bond market, disinflation slowing the rate of inflation, which is disinflation, is expected in the near future. And that's what everybody thinks is going to be going, straight into hyperinflation. And we're seeing a little bit of a slowing of that right now. But is inflation coming down the road? The answer is we think yes. And is it going to be hyperinflation? Yes. Is it going to be low growth? Yes. Is it going to be stagflation? Yes. But the matter of is when was that going to happen? Okay, so U.S. 10-year Treasury rate in March of 2021 was 1.75, but by September it dropped to 1.29. Okay, that's a 26% decrease, and it indicates disinflation during that period of time. Now, the 10-year Treasury rate is used by lenders to price 30-year fixed rate loans, so the interest rate on a 30-year fixed rate loan decreases significantly during this time. It actually went down, and interest rates have slightly upticked at the start of the first quarter of 2022. So what's happened now is that they had a real big refinance boom going on late 2021, but into 2022. We saw interest rates uptick a little bit, and we don't really know where they're going to go from this point. We don't think it's going to go up or down very far compared, based on what the Fed's been talking about. Main point is that even though the hard data does not show inflation, the Fed thinks inflation will occur. And if they think it's going to occur, then you have to front run the Fed a little bit by figuring out, okay, are they going to start tightening the economy by either slowing down their asset purchases or increasing interest rates? The answer is yeah, they're going to do that to try to fight inflation. And they're going to be doing that into weakness, economic weakness. And that economic weakness is going to be make this a real issue because that's typically not what you want to do into a weak situation, but they're going to do it anyway. So they reacted accordingly by starting to reduce asset purchases, tapering in November, and thus reducing liquidity in the financial markets. Okay, and what happens is that the Fed has been purchasing treasuries, U.S. treasuries, and mortgage-backed securities. And these are securities that are issued, that are collateralized by real estate loans and mortgage-backed securities. And what those are supposed to be sold to investors by primary dealers and is sold to investors, but the Fed is coming in and they're actually buying them and injecting liquidity into the market. And so what they're doing now, they're saying they're going to start reducing the amount of asset purchases, which means that they're going to be tightening. And they've even said they're going to accelerate that tightening so that it's going to be a really, it may end up being a situation where we have a reducing asset purchases, the tapering into a very weak economy could cause some problems in the financial markets. Fed wants to increase inflation, pay back the national debt, cheaper inflated dollars, just like we mentioned, but not so much that it'll cause a major market adjustment in the stock market. In other words, they're tapering or slowing of the Fed's purchases of U.S. treasuries and mortgage-backed securities could be the straw that breaks the camel's back in 2022. And here I'll show you why. Even though the hard numbers point to disinflation, which is a reduction in the rate of inflation, the Fed stated in the past that food prices are a better indicator than the personal consumption expenditures, PCE, and the Consumer Price Index for underlying inflation trends. The PCE does not include food and energy prices, and the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, we just talked about, uses artificially depressed residential rents that are subject to rent control because the data is easy to get rather than more accurate market rents. So the Fed looks at food prices and believes that rampant inflation is upon us. What this means is that the Fed says they use the PCE, but they like to use food prices, which are going up significantly at the end of 2021 and into 2022. And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, well, then we'll also look at the Consumer Price Index, but then they get lazy and they use the rent controlled data because it's easy to get. So they'll go to somewhere like San Francisco and they say, okay, what's San Francisco charging for rents? And they look at their subsidized rents. They look at the ones that are under rent control, and they say, okay, this is where we're actually at. Unfortunately, that's not a good measurement because that's not the market rents. Those are usually pretty well depressed, and the market rents are higher, and so they give them a distorted look at the numbers that they're using. Unfortunately, so you got to watch the Fed. One of the guys, really good advisors, says do whatever the Fed's doing, do exactly opposite of what they're doing. So pretty much explains it. And the Fed reacted to the increased inflation by starting to taper their U.S. Treasury and mortgage-backed security purchases. Instead of primary dealers and investors buying U.S. Treasuries that are in high demand, Fed is buying U.S. Treasury bonds itself using the money it prints out of thin air. That's how they do that. Come right out of thin air, and they inject liquidity into the markets. Same thing is happening with mortgage loans. This is called quantitative easing. They call it QE. It increases the money supply and provides direct liquidity to U.S. financial markets. And they've been using quantitative easing for several years now. And so the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank, of course, for the United States, they use some tools they have in their toolbox, and unfortunately, they're running out of tools. They've got themselves in a corner right now. Fed's reaction of tapering the QE purchases at the same time the U.S. economy is actually weakening, which you got to remember, you got to be real careful with the numbers you're getting on the economy, because that employment and unemployment, what happens is that it does not take into account people who have given up looking for a job. And that's a bunch. Matter of fact, there's like 15 million prime age 25 to 54-year-old workers not being in the labor force while collecting unemployment benefits. And although those two go up and down, it causes an increase, in interest rates. But the problem is that the numbers that you're getting from from the Fed and from other government agencies, a lot of times are not right. They're not correct. So you got to really be careful with them. And the unemployment rate is one of those. Lately, there's been a rush to refinance real estate loans because of the financial media's inflation narrative. Interest rates are at all-time lows. People want to lock in these lower interest rates with long-term fixed-rate loans. Since fixed-rate loans do not increase with an increase in interest rates, usually a good choice during inflationary conditions. So what's happening now is people are going in and they're refinancing, or if they're purchasing, they're getting loans, but they're getting 30-year fixed-rate loans. Because down the road, and this could be quite a ways down the road, but it's down the road, they may have to increase interest rates, like we mentioned, to bust hyperinflation, like we did back in the 70s, 80s. So that's why they're getting ready now with these long-term fixed-rate loans. And of course, remember, as inflation kicks in, the money that you pay on debt service on that is, matter of fact, is going to be worth less in the future. In other words, it's inflated. So because inflation benefits borrowers, so you're borrowing money, now you're paying it back in the future with money that is actually worth less. It's cheaper. So it's because of inflation. So that benefits you that way. And also you have a fixed rate. So as interest rates go up, you're sitting with a fixed rate loan that can't change. And since fixed rate loans do not increase with an increase in interest rates, they're usually a good choice during inflationary conditions. Residential real estate prices have increased due to reduced interest rates and pent-up demand from the COVID pandemic. As long as wages stay up and interest rates do not increase too much, residential real estate should be less affected than other real estate types like big box retailers and office buildings and other asset classes and other classes like stocks. So what's happening now is the residential real estate looks to be very attractive, single family and multi-unit. A lot of the least investments that are out there may get hit. They are getting hit right now, but they will continue to get hit. And then the stocks may have a problem as the Fed tightens into weakness. You could have a stock market adjustment. Mid to long-term projections continue to indicate inflation and even hyperinflation in the future, along with low growth that causes stagflation, which is inflation with no growth. The good news is that real estate has traditionally been an excellent inflation hedge. Overall volatility is the last thing investors want to see in 2022. Decrease in the Fed's asset purchases is a form of tightening. Less liquidity in the capital markets into a weak economy, just like we mentioned. So they're going to be slowing down the purchases of the treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, which tightens. And then they've also said they may be increasing interest rates near the end of 2022. And that, of course, could very much cause a stock market crash. So the Fed tightened its economic weakness in 2016, and this caused a 20% drop in the stock market. So they did this before, and they're doing it again. So if you're in the stock market, keep an eye on it. When the reaction to the Fed's moves causes stock market turmoil, the Fed will likely be forced to reverse course and increase liquidity, thus increasing QE and decreasing interest rates once again. And how will this affect residential real estate values in California? So what we think is that they're in a position to, and matter of fact, let's sum that up on the next slide here. Residential real estate, median incomes. It should stay pretty steady on the incomes. They probably will go up somewhat as inflation kicks in down the road. But remember, when you have a job as an employee, your income is not going to increase as fast as the inflation rate. So you're going to have to really watch that as an employee. Now, as a business owner, you can increase your prices a little bit to cover that. That's why you see a lot of people who are leaving their jobs as employees, and they're starting businesses as one-person shops. They're just because then they can affect that their pricing during the inflation and at least stay up with the not have to worry about wages not keeping up because they'll be actually running their own business. Also, interest rates we think are going to stay low for a long time, just for the fact that the Fed cannot raise them, and then they'll end up shooting themselves in the foot with the amount of debt that's out there. And so, do we see some more price appreciation for real estate? The answer is yes. In 2022, looks like the appreciation should continue up for a while. We don't know how long, but it should be a good year for 2022, and also you should be able to increase rents down the road. And of course, by doing that with residential income properties, is you can track inflation by raising rents. And if you're in vacation rentals, it's even more so because you can increase the nightly rate each time a guest stays there. So it's even more effective with vacation rentals. The negative, of course, with them is that with the COVID, if there's more lockdowns down the road, which I don't think we don't anticipate that, but there is, you could get hurt with those again, just like the hotel industry did. And of course, the last thing, the 30-year fixed rate loans. Those are good because you can take out the loan today at a low interest rate, and it will be low for quite a long period of time. But you'll also have the property value locked in, so you can make some pretty hopefully serious price appreciation in the future. Okay, so, and this is Accredited Real Estate Schools, and I hope you enjoyed our first quarter real estate market update for 2022. And we'll be coming out with another second quarter update here in the start of the second quarter. We'll see what changes have been made between now and then. So have a very great day, and thanks for watching.